Tanakava. So, you should know, remember that, been my custom for the last few years on the second day of Rosh Hashanah to teach a text rather than, give, more didactic type of sermon. So this is the text today, and I want to, as I sometimes say before I speak, I'll say a few words. So I want to preface this with a couple of things. So you may know that the IRS recently issued guidance essentially revoking what's known as the Johnson Amendment. For religious organizations only specifically, the Johnson Amendment says that tax exempt organizations can lose their tax exemption if they endorse a candidate, right? So for as long as I've been alive, synagogues have not endorsed candidates. Now, this has not meant that a rabbi or any other person could not endorse a candidate in their purely private capacity, right? In other words, if I write on my Facebook to vote for somebody, that's fine. That's me as an individual, right? If I stand up there and say, vote for this person, that's as a synagogue, and up until a little while ago, I wasn't supposed to do that. Now, having said that, a couple of things. One, my own personal policy has been never, even in a purely private capacity, to endorse a candidate, okay? And some of you may not realize the full implications of that, because when we lived in Connecticut, my wife ran for the Board of Education. And that was an elected position. She was a candidate. I did not endorse her. She won anyway. You said to your wife. No, she was fine with me not endorsing her, okay? So I didn't even endorse my wife, okay? So all the more so somebody else, but now it's legal for me to stand up here and tell you who I think you should vote for. I'm not gonna do that. I mean, among other reasons, we don't have any elections this year in Maryland anyway, so. But I think that is wrong, and more importantly, a coalition of about 10 major American Jewish organizations recently issued guidance saying, despite the fact that this is now legal, we think it's a bad idea, and this is why. Okay, and if anybody's interested, send me an email after Yom I'll send you that statement. Among the organizations on that statement are the United Synagogue and the Rabbinical Assembly, right? So the official position of our movement is that rabbis and synagogues should not endorse candidates. Now, it's only diet, right? But it also says that speaking up on issues of the day, particularly from a Jewish perspective, is not the same thing as endorsing a candidate. And just as it is wrong to endorse a candidate, it is wrong to refrain from commenting on the issues of the day when they are important issues for our country or for our community, and Judaism has something to say about it. Right, now, I'll also add that many rabbis in New York City who have never endorsed a candidate are torn this year, right, about whether they should endorse or not endorse, or not say vote for, but say don't vote, whatever. And, my perspective, I mean, I don't live in New York City. Doesn't matter as much for me. My guidance is that there are four very flawed candidates running for mayor of New York City, and probably, pick the one that you think is least flawed. Okay, and if you ask me who is least flawed, I don't know. I said least flawed, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm talking about New York, right? So my New York accent comes back. But, you should speak about issues of the day, but not make partisan statements. I have two more having said that, all right? The first having said that is Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove, who is probably the most prominent pulpit rabbi in America right now, certainly the most prominent conservative rabbi, began a sermon a few years ago where he said that emphasizing the importance of menschlichkeit can be seen as a partisan political statement. Okay, so and let me ask this. Who here believes menschlichkeit is important? Raise your hand. Who here, being a man, right? Who here believes that being a man is not important? Okay, so I should be able to give that statement without fear of being perceived as partisan, but inevitably somebody will or might, right? So the last, having said that, is that, so this is a text from, it's a Talmud style commentary on a speech by Martin Luther King. Okay, and the first Hillel many years ago, I think I was still working for Hillel, did a Talmud style commentary on Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. Okay, and I looked for that and I found it, and it's a PDF that's 11 by 17, and it's like, it just would not work for this setting. So I found something similar, which was prepared by Bruce Messenger.
For President, Borough President of the County of New York.
Right, she was Manhattan Borough President, and when she finished being Manhattan Borough President, she became the head of the American Jewish World Service. So, not only a politician who is a Jew, but a Jewish politician. Okay, and so this is the text that she prepared, and it says, when to, the need to speak up and speak out, to act, to make a difference. Okay, and I have to tell you that I was a little afraid of teaching this text. And then I said to myself, the fact that I'm afraid to teach it means that I have to, right? Because we should not be afraid of talking about Jewish values from a Jewish perspective. And if we are afraid of talking about Jewish values from a Jewish perspective, happy, really. So there's a lot here. I don't mean to teach all of it. This sermon that King gave, and I'm not going to look at the sermon at all, because I really want to look at Jewish texts. but this is a sermon that he gave at the Riverside Church in 1967. And it was a very controversial sermon, even within the civil rights movement, because this was the sermon where he came out against the Vietnam War. Okay, and a lot of people said to him, stick to civil rights, right? The minute you start talking about the Vietnam War, you're going to lose people, right? Because don't forget, I mean, who was president in 67? LBJ, who helped put through the civil rights legislative agenda. LBJ, who got us into the morass in Vietnam. LBJ, right? Really Kennedy, but you know. So if you speak against the war, you're going to alienate LBJ. And, you know, he said, I have to do this. Okay, so, but believe me, right? Every rabbi has heard at some point, not every, but most, right? Why do you have to talk about these things, right? Why do you have to talk about these things, right? Talk about keeping kosher, right? Because that won't alienate anybody. Well, not exactly true, right? Talk about keeping Shabbos, because that won't alienate anybody, right? Talk about supporting Israel, because that won't alienate it, right? I mean, right, everything, right? But no, you have, so here is a text from Midrash Tanhuma, which is 3rd, 4th century. If a person of learning participates in public affairs and serves as judge or arbiter, they give stability to the land, right? So if we participate in public life, that's a good thing, according to this midrash. But if they sit in their home and say to themselves, what have the affairs of society to do with me? Why should I trouble myself with the people's voices of protest? Let my soul dwell in peace. If one does this, they overthrow the world. Okay, in other words, if you simply sit at home and say, this, you know, this doesn't involve me, this doesn't involve me, that act or that non-act destroys the world. Right now, this is a commentary. We could build commentary on commentary on commentary, right? My commentary would be that racism or religious prejudice may not always start with the Jews. It always gets to us. Right? We know the rest of the poem, right? We know the rest of the poem, right? First they came for, right? And I would maintain that it's a matter of Jewish interest, right? Even if you bracket all other moral and ethical considerations, it is a matter of Jewish interest, because once you unleash and validate hatred of any type, it winds up with us, right? I mean, if you need further proof, right? Why do we have a police car sitting out there, and guards, and locked doors, and cameras, and alarms, and bulletproof lights, right? 3 words, free of life, right? What was that perpetrator's issue? What was his problem? Why did he go in there? Okay, because he perceived the Jewish community as supporting refugees. Right? It was refugee Shabbat. It was highest refugee Shabbat. when he went in there and he believed, I'll give you another 3 words. Okay, great replacement theory. Okay? Who knows what the great replacement theory is? Yeah, Jacob.
But everyone else is trying to replace the urination that's like easier. And I can.
Everybody else is right, but specifically the Jews, right? The Jews, right? They may say George Soros, but by George Soros, they mean the Jews. Right, look, there's a lot of things not to like him. I'm not defending him, I'm just saying that he's often just a stand-in for the Jews. Right, that the Jews are trying to bring the foreigners to replace the white people and guarantee a democratic deep majority, et cetera. So, and you may sit here and laugh, okay? But a lot of people believe it, okay? A lot of people believe it. And a lot of people at the memorial service for Charlie Kirk were talking about it. Because he believed, okay? Which I said the other day, and I still believe, okay? And hopefully the FCC is not listening, but you can be pro-Israel and an anti-Semite at the same time. Absolutely, right? And you can be lionized by right-wing Orthodox rabbis and still be an anti-Semite. So, not only is it morally important to speak up, it's in our own best interest to speak up. Okay. Let me say, but it is, right? It is a task without end, right? It is a Sisyphean task. Right, the myth of Sisyphus, right? The guy had pushed the boulder up, and then I'll get to you in a second, right? But then comes Rabbi Tarfon in Pirkei Avot. It is not your responsibility to finish the work of perfecting the world, but you are not free to desist from it either. Yeah, Dee.
I forget the year, but it was a year when I was a young teacher, which many years ago, and, the oil crisis came. And for those of you who remember this, you remember that buy gas based on whether you had an odd or even license plate. And the lines were unending. And I was teaching a class in communication, and I had 2 sisters who were twins, both of them. And the discussion came up, going back to what you were talking about, learning about desert. And the discussion came up, who was responsible for it, and the kids were mad, because their parents were so tied up trying to get gas. And one sister, and I had a beautiful relationship with the whole class, and one sister said, the Jews. Now, I was teaching at Sherwood High School in Conway, very rural, also, and I think there were only 2 Jews in school. And I don't make any secret to that, if my kids knew I was Jewish. And everybody in the classroom looked around at everybody else and looked back at me, and now them, and like, what could I do? I can't share this, I'm sorry. I hurt so badly in my heart, and those of you who know how passionate I can get, I was about ready to lash out. And I swear, something from above tapping my shoulder, shut up. And just as that came out of her mouth, her sister said, how can you say that? And she said, Emily, you know, that's what Dad said at the dinner table. And the class jumped all over. And I didn't say one word. Everybody was looking at me, and the tears just kind of rolled down my face. And in unison, as if it had been rehearsed, the kids would say, we don't feel that way, Miss Dallas. Get on with us. But the point of the story is, this is difficult. And it's exactly what the rabbi's talking about. You can come to different events and instances where this anti-Semitism issue has really gone to that. Thank you.
Right, no, I absolutely, and that,
I had never experienced anti-Semitism before.
right, and I'll just say briefly, right, that people talk now about anti-Semitism coming from the far right and the far left. And I had an experience a few weeks ago on online anti-Semitism from the far left. Okay, without going into it, I would say a classmate of mine from college who is an ex-friend, okay, said, you know, there was a discussion about how do we stop Netanyahu, legitimate discussion, and she said, we really need to start boycotting American Jews. Okay, and I tried to engage with her, they say in French, Cornish husband, right? So it's real, okay? It's, I mean, she's not gonna punish you with a machine gun, but anti-Semitism on the left is as real as it is on the right, absolutely, okay? And I want to say that you is a result of things, okay, but not always. But having said that, I really do think the cure is prevention, it's not cure, right? It's always the fire department wants to prevent fires, not put them out, right? And if you look at the history of Catholic-Jewish relations globally, right? I mean, because I just a week ago, I went to this conference on the 60th anniversary of Nostra Aetate. Nostra Aetate is the Vatican document essentially saying, no, the Jews didn't kill Jesus, right? But who are the popes who did the most for Catholic-Jewish relations? Well, John Paul II, who grew up in Poland and had many Jewish friends, right? And Pope Francis, who was from Buenos Aires, where there is not only like a thriving Jewish community, but a conservative rabbinical, right? And the rector of that rabbinical school is one of his best friends, okay? So it's personal relation, right? And now Pope Leo is from Chicago. There's a lot of Jews in Chicago, right? Now, having said that, he spent most of his career in Peru, and not in Lima, where there is a shul, but in a remote part. So it really, you know, remains to be seen. I mean, I'm sure that, like, from a policy perspective, he'll be fine, but whether he has that same warmth that grows out of friendship. Right, and it is that warmth that grows out of friendship, right, that somebody could exactly that, hear this blatantly anti-Semitic stuff and say, but that can't be right, because I know this job. Right? That can't be right, because I know Rabbi Sport. Right? That is really, I think, the key. Okay, there's a lot here. I don't want to go too long, but I want to, there's two things here. One, I'm not even going to look at it, but it's the question, so the right hand side, because I've taught this in ethics stuff, particularly to teenagers, but not on that. All right, so here's the situation. Right, you are walking by a lake, okay? Like, you're walking by Lake Whetstone, and somebody is drowning. Okay, and you are a good swimmer, and you could jump in and pull them out with very minimal risk to your own safety. And you look at your watch, I could save them, but somebody's meeting me at Starbucks, so whatever, you know, I can't do it. Under American law, what crime have you committed? Nothing, right? Law school, 3 years of law school at AU, not aware, right? Right? You have committed no crime, right? the Seinfeld anomaly notwithstanding, right? You have committed no crime because under American law, you have no obligation to help. You may be a bad person, but it's not illegal to be a bad person, right? But under halacha, you in fact have violated the law, right? You shall not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. Okay, so if we have a duty to say, now, I said you're a good swimmer, minimal risk, right? If you're not necessarily obligated to take an excessive risk, right? And if you know, if you could sort of reason, this is kind of dangerous for me, then you don't have, right? But if you can do it with minimal to no risk, you really are obligated to do it, okay? And then so bottom left-hand side of the page, and this is a quote that we hear often, particularly in conservative circles, because it's from Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who is professor at JTS, right? But this is the whole context, okay? There is immense silent agony in the world, and the task of man, right? Today we would say humanity, right? But the task of man is to be a voice for the plundered poor, to prevent the desecration of the soul and the violation of our dream of honesty. The more deeply immersed I become in the thinking of the prophets, the more powerfully it became clear to me what the lives of the prophets sought to convey. That morally speaking, there is no limit to the concern one must feel for the suffering of human beings. There is no limit to the concern one must feel for the suffering of human beings. Okay, and so here I'll say, I had trouble sleeping last night, and I found myself watching a lot of different Rosh Hashanah sermons on YouTube from rabbis that I respect. And I saw particularly the sermon by Rabbi Angela Buckall of Central Synagogue. And she said some, you know, I spoke about Rabbi Cosgrove, right? Said that there are people in the Jewish community who can only cry for the suffering of Israeli children. And there are people in the Jewish community who can only cry for the suffering of Palestinian children. And the people on one side of that divide want to cast the people on the other side of that divide out of the community. Right now, I do not believe that we are as divided as that. Okay, I'm sure that we are divided, but I don't think, and I really don't, I'm not just making up like a rhetorical, I really don't think that anybody in this room would say that if you cry for Palestinian children, I want you out of my community. Or if you cry for Israeli children, I want you out of my community, right? We should be able, and I'm not even talking about policy, I'm just talking about feeling the suffering, right? Feeling the suffering and lamenting the suffering, and that's what Heschel says, right? Morally speaking, there is no limit to the concern one must feel for the suffering of human beings, that indifference to evil is worse than evil itself, that in a free society, some are guilty, but all are responsible. Okay, now here's where I want to wrap. He says that indifference to evil is worse than evil. How so? How so? How is it, yeah, Karen?
So I think what they're saying is the person who is truly evil may not perceive that they are truly evil. But if you do nothing, you are helping that evil along and you know better.
Right, you know better, right? And you're right. I mean, most people don't perceive themselves right? I mean, the great exception would probably be Dr. Evil, right? But other than Dr., most people who we look at, you say that they think you're doing good, right? But they are enabled by the people who say, not my problem, too risky to get involved, et cetera, yeah.
I was gonna say, since we're gonna learn about that in a little over a month. We'll be a little over a month, but that is the sin of Sodom.
The sin of
Sodom.
stone, right, well, yeah, as far as the rabbi is concerned, right, as far as the rabbi is concerned, exactly that the people of Stone were inhospitable to strangers, and the rest of them knew it was wrong, but they didn't do anything about it. Yeah, Mark.
Did you say in the beginning of your talk that it's not our responsibility to fix the world?
I said it's not our responsibility to complete it, because it's impossible, it's an endless task. But what I'm saying is that the fact that it's an endless task, right? I mean, I do whatever action, okay, it doesn't matter, I've done a lot of them for the last 8 months, right? And I mean, is my action going to fix the immigration problem in this country? No. Does that mean I'm exempt from it? Also, no, right?
But you don't know that. You don't know that if you do something for the world, and it's not gonna help solve the problem. You don't know that.
You're right, you're right, you're absolutely right, and thank you, Mark. Because I am absolutely gonna wrap up with this, but I'm gonna go somewhere that you would never anticipate from me. Okay? That is precisely the philosophy of Chabad. Right? Right? In other words, every time a mitzvah is observed, and primarily from Jews, but not exclusively from Jews, right? There are divine sparks that get released. Okay, and when enough divine sparks get released, that's when the Messiah will come. Right, so for you to say, not you, but for anybody, okay, so this crazy rabbi has cornered me and they want me to put on tefillin, and what good will that do? Right, how do you know that you putting on tefillin that morning is not the last spark that will bring Mashiach? So you are absolutely right. I am standing here saying, I can't solve the problem, but I'll do it anyway. And you're saying, you don't know that you really can't solve the problem. You don't know that. Maybe it's your action that actually will solve the problem. So, I don't know how much Chabad stuff you could study, but clearly, but that is, no joke, that is a Chabad philosophy, and that is one of the reasons why they're so strong.
Yeah, well, I didn't know the connection. Look at Hanukkah.
Look at,
Hanukkah. Why not just like,
right. All right. Shana Tova, thank you.
Can you start?
Yeah, thank you.